Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices, where they work, and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
I'm Danielle Triplett.
And I'm Janelle Hughes.
Hi, Janelle.
Welcome, Janelle.
We are back with another episode in our bonus series with the Crisis Prevention Work Group from the Center on PBIS. Janelle Hughes is again joining us as our co-host on Expert Instruction today. Janelle, do you want to set us up with our the topic that we're exploring today with our guest, Kristin Bailey?
Sure thing. And thank you both for having me back. I'm really excited about this conversation today with Kristin. And, I think this topic is a tough one. In our field, we often use a lot of jargon, but this concept of ethical protection without criminalization in the school setting, I think it's going to be fun and a learning opportunity for all three of us as we kind of figure out, what does that really mean? And how does it relate to this topic of integrating PBIS into prevention and protection and mitigation strategies? So,
yes, I really appreciated being able to work through this as a concept with all of you today in our episode. During the conversation, the thing that really stuck out were all of those places, all those points of overlap with PBIS as a framework, that the values kind of running underneath ethical protection are accountability, but also safety and community and equity and all of those things, all of those good little words that we use to describe PBIS. So there really is a nice intersection between this as a concept within the work that you all do around crisis prevention and this larger framework of PBIS.
All good stuff.
And what stood out for me is, I have a few catchphrases, Megan, that you've heard over the years.
They're so good, though. They're so good.
One of them is always what's guided me through my whole career, from being starting in the middle school language arts classroom to here, is what's best for kids, right? And I think that's why I'm drawn to PBIS and why I've, kind of dedicated my work to this, the framework. And what I hear in this conversation just really reemphasizes that, right? Like, that is what the heart of this is, doing what's best for kids. And then the other part is really focusing back on prevention. Like, we know that there are, going to be crises, unfortunately, in school settings, and that mistakes that are made and safety is threatened, and we'll respond to those. And I know that this really talked about how to do that, with being protective and not criminalizing it, and really focusing on discipline to teach. But it's also, the heart of PBIS is prevention and being proactive and building relationships. So a lot of the things that we talked about really help, just reemphasize those as key concepts and really critical components to do this work. How about you, Janelle? What stood out for you?
I feel like this is one of those conversations that I'll probably be continuing to unpack throughout the day when I'm on my own. But I think there's everything that you just said, the two of you. But I think what also stood out to me is the way that we use language in the field, right? So we talk about discipline, we talk about safety, we talk about prevention, and, we talk about school safety and emergency operations plan development, but we rarely talk about how all of these things intersect. And I think that's what's standing out for me right now is, when you think about that common thread that exists between, building a sense of belonging, and the sense of trust within the school community. And that's the school climate part of it. But then when you think about the behaviors and practices that exist, within the classroom setting, and that's the PBIS, part of it. But then when you also think about restorative practices, and there are just so many things to think about in the context of this conversation. But I think, you have to be very careful how we both use language in the school setting, but also in the school community as well. When Kristin talked about discipline and safety kind of being used interchangeably.
Yes.
They're two different concept. So I think what I loved about this conversation is I've got a lot of answers to questions, but I also feel like new questions formed, and I want to continue to explore this topic even more as I continue to partner with lovely ladies like yourself, the team at the Center on PBIS, but also other practitioners in the field. There's still so much work to do to make sure that we understand how all of these concepts, PBIS, school safety, restorative practices, come together as a whole to support the kids, as
Yeah.
Danielle said. That's what it's
Yeah.
all about at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think all of you listening are going to find something that will stick with you and you'll ruminate on it for the rest of your day, maybe even long after. Even Kristin had some things that she wanted to think about right at the end. Listen in as she challenges all of us to walk our talk and continue to do the work even when it's difficult. Take a listen. Well, hi, Kristin. Thanks so much for joining us today on this bonus episode.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Janelle, of course, sent you our way. And we're so happy to have you talk to us today about this term that was brand new to me. I've had Janelle and you have both described it to me several ways. So I thought it might be helpful for everybody else too. This whole idea of when we say ethical protection without criminalization within the context of this crisis prevention series that we're doing, what does that actually mean? Like, what are we talking about there? What does ethical protection mean? Who are we protecting and from what? What are some of the things that we're already doing that maybe we should be changing up? I don't know. Let's start with a quick definition or a long one.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such an important framing because it also helps make sure that we maintain our focus on everyone. That's kind of what I was hearing as you were framing up the question there,
Yeah.
really making sure that as we look at protection and as we look at safety planning, um, we are keeping everyone in mind, including the student that that we may be sitting with some pretty significant concerns about. So I think about the ethical protection of that particular student. What does it look like to make sure that they're okay, that they are safe, that they are engaging safely with others, while also not doing that second part that was named in the question, criminalizing that student. And also thinking about what it looks like to make sure that everybody in the building is safe. So really looking at the well-being of all.
So that's a really good question, Megan. I think for me, ethical protection means creating safety without unnecessarily causing harm to the very students, of course, that we're all trying to support. And I think it requires taking a step back and asking, from the prevention side of things, not only how do we stop a threat, right? But also what are those long term impacts of the way that we respond to that very threat? And so protection is not just about protecting the school from disruption. It's about, protecting those students who may be harmed, also the student or students who are struggling or acting out, staff and families. And also just that broader sense of, trust and belonging within the school community. And I think it means recognizing that some responses may improve immediate quote unquote order, if you will, and create a sense of safety. But in other ways, they may create, lasting damage or, it may impact that school climate through feelings of exclusion, stigma, or just overall disconnection. So I think ethical protection, the overall goal of it is safety that preserves dignity, relationships both within the school building and outside of the school building as well. And, just those opportunities for learning wherever possible, preserving them in ways that make the entire community remain whole.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And it's part of the reason that we want to really make sure that we avoid that conflation, that possible conflation between discipline and safety.
Mm.
Exactly what you named there. That's one of those early responses that can come up when someone has made a threat or is perceived to have made a threat or is engaging in behavior that's already caused maybe even physical harm. So many of us have that disciplinary response that comes to the forefront, right? Of thinking about, okay, this has happened. Now, discipline must be part of the planned response here and is often immediate. Like Janelle, you talked about that, like that very early response that can feel like it restores a sense of safety at the outset. But when we look at the longer term, we haven't necessarily accomplished anything that moves us closer to long term safety. And in fact, may have inadvertently done the opposite because all of those feelings that you named, the disconnection and the exclusion, and I would say shame can go along with that,
Mhm.
um, can actually negate or undermine the possibility of safety in the long term.
Mhm.
Mhm.
When you
Mhm.
put words to it like that, it really rings true for me. It's, this idea that if that person is not around, I am therefore safer than I was when they
Mhm.
were. And it's not just in schools. I mean, I think you look at our culture here in the United States, we do the same, with our criminal justice system, with prisons
Mhm.
and all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, incarceration.
Right. Right. It is this like, it's for many of us, a very deeply rooted cultural mindset.
Mhm.
You've caused harm or you've created a lack of sense of safety or have violated, someone's sense of safety. And therefore, this must be part of the response. And I think
Mhm.
unfortunately can kind of take the lead on response and not
Yes.
necessarily move us closer to restoring safety.
I want to bring us back to the word discipline because I used to do a lot of work in this area in particular, and I would talk to people, educators, and others about the root of the word discipline is disciple, which means to teach. So we often use it as, oh, we're going to put some discipline in place, and ultimately in education, like that's what we're all about is actually helping people, supporting them, teaching them
Mhm.
what needs to happen differently, what's building up their skills that they're lacking, or whatever's going on. But so often we think of, oh, to discipline, it's to remove them, to punish and do that, and really the heart of it is actually at teaching. So.
Janelle,
Yeah,
what were you
that's
gonna say?
Mhm.
No, I mean, that's so true, Danielle, what you just shared. And I think from that perspective, then discipline and safety, both become synonymous with this sense of control and compliance and removal, that
Mhm.
you mentioned,
Mhm.
Kristen. And so those then common responses, become, okay, well, let's suspend or expel, or let's remove that student from the classroom or for, this extracurricular activity or let's increase surveillance or the presence of community law enforcement or SROs, and so it's these more zero tolerance approaches become kind of ingrained into the school culture and climate, and sometimes
Mhm.
unintentionally.
100% agree. So
yeah.
Sim, let's explore this a little more and tell us about what safety looks like when it's not rooted primarily in some of these things that include exclusion or punishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely opportunities to use discipline in the way that you initially described, right? What does it look like to hold this student here with us, right? To maintain them in this and maintain them in this environment and do some of that teaching and learning. And maybe as a first step, we even need to identify what was driving all of this, what was going on here, and really look at that from a developmentally appropriate perspective. Often kids can find themselves in real hot water and having said something or having done something that implicates the safety of others in a way that was even totally non-intentional. They're lacking understanding. So identifying what is it that they need and then what can it look like to do that teaching and have the student do some learning around that. Sometimes we're talking about longer term trauma mitigation, right? And that's really hard work to do in schools. I mean, that's a significant capacity pull. But if we understand what's driving the student and what they need to engage in, the more safe behavior that we need to see out of them, then we can do a lot of meaningful work in that space. Again, it's just kind of that other reaction that is more the exclusionary type discipline that moves us away from doing that work. Sometimes the threat response process does need to be, a part of what we implement in response to student conduct. And I recognize that there can be a sense of punishment that flows from that and a sense of stigmatization that flows from that. But I also believe that we can implement in a way that does feel inclusive and trauma informed, and that helps to hold a student and family close while we walk through the process of identifying, what was the behavior, is there a plan, are there means to carry out the plan, and then what do we need to look at doing from that safety and support perspective for the student to help make sure that any potential to cause harm is not carried out in the school setting or anywhere, quite frankly. But we can learn a lot through that process, and I think it just comes down to implementing in a way that continues to hold them, within our community versus something that's exclusionary. And we get a lot more information that way, right? That's another thing is when we have a response that's initially, gonna induce shame and is flowing from that exclusionary or punitive place, we have undercut ourselves and our ability to learn what we need to learn to then move the needle on safety and encourage the conduct that we really want to see.
Hmm. I think PBIS really, of course, we love PBIS as a system here at the Center on PBIS, but I think it plays an important role in balancing what you were just talking about, Kristin, which is kind of like that accountability, with the support and still that, sense of belonging. And, I think sometimes PBIS is often misunderstood as being like soft on behavior.
Yeah.
But reality really emphasizes accountability while, as Kristin just stressed, asking those important questions. What support does the student need? Like what skills is missing in this conversation? And also how do we repair the harm and restore hopefully that connection? But I think, PBIS really encourages data-based decision making and helps schools identify those patterns too of, exclusion or inequity or just punitive approaches that maybe aren't helping as much as they may be harming.
Yeah. What's coming to mind is when you talk about parts of PBIS or behavior and prevention that are often misunderstood, this idea of restorative practices, which I think is what you're describing here, comes up quite a bit. I think there are some who really get a lot of benefit out of them, and there are others that don't understand exactly how that works. Especially when we're talking about trying to shift a mindset from I don't want this student in or around me anymore, and now you're asking me to engage in some kind of conversation with them. It doesn't feel like I'm being protected in that scenario. And so I know Danielle, you have quite a bit of experience with restorative practices, and Janelle, you too. I wondered if the two of you might be able to shed some light on how those types of practices might come into play here and how it can be a protective and safe practice for both people that are trying to come together and figure out what happened.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I mean, what I've learned and experienced with restorative practices or just the restorative approach in general is that it's it's holding people accountable for the choices and they made and the impact of their actions, but also while doing that while keeping them as part of the community, right? And saying, yeah, we all sort of the understanding of we all make mistakes and we're all imperfect and we see you, and let's come to a place where we can get curious about it and listen and provide more support and build skills and repair the harm that was done in a way that is really maintaining the dignity of us as humans, and not just because it's easier. So that, from my experience, is what restorative practices is all about. It's not soft; it's actually supportive, and inclusive, right? Janelle, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the topic.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, I just wish that I could put everything that you just said on like index cards and paste them all over my daughter's wall.
Mhm.
But I think, I agree with what you just shared. Restorative practices, when we talk about it and approaches, we often think about it in the context of response. But it
Mhm.
really, I think the strongest restorative work is framed around prevention. It happens long before a crisis, takes place. It's those community building circles, or, as
Yep.
you talked about, just building strong relationships and opportunities for student voice and just school community voice in general. And, when a harm does occur and, you're thinking about response, restorative practices can help focus on, who was affected, what needs to be repaired, and how do we move forward together, in this case, as a school community. And I think restorative practices complements PBIS in a nice way
Yes.
because, again, both focus on prevention, relationship building, as you just shared, Danielle, and then teaching, which is the heart of
Mhm.
discipline.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then community as well.
Mhm.
So, I wish that more people understood that, restorative practices it's not just used as a strategy for responding to harm. It's a strategy that can be used for creating the kind of school climate and community where hopefully harm is less likely to happen in the first place.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And it's really thinking about that. Like we keep hitting on what are the things that we need to teach and that students may need to learn when they're, going through any of these kind of incidents or processes. And if we have this baked in from the beginning, like it's
Mhm.
very exciting to think about the possibility of what it looks like for 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds to engage in a process like this if they have to, if they need to, right? If they've been doing it since the time they were 4 and 5.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And they actually really do have that sense of this is my community. We are accountable to each other. I can take accountability without shutting down in a space of shame. You can take accountability without shutting down in a space of shame. And
Mhm.
if we've established a foundation of all of that, then, like you named, Janelle, if a harm does occur, the ability to repair it is so much easier. And over time, it's less of that kind of having to prove that it works or that it's not a soft approach because you can really see it in action when it's been baked in start to finish. And so it's such a critically important part of the culture. Trying to trot it out at the time of significant harm when we haven't really baked it in as a
Yeah.
practice,
Yeah.
it can become a setup for folks to feel like, see, it doesn't really work.
Mhm.
So it's just right, critically important from an early age, but also kind of that start to finish, the community building, the circles. This is what it looks like to repair harm.
Mhm.
So much importance is placed on a person's ability to demonstrate remorse
Mm.
when they've caused harm intentionally or otherwise. So, so often it's inadvertent or unknowing, but when they've caused harm intentionally or otherwise, we tend to look for how good are you at demonstrating remorse,
Mm.
even if it's not
Mm.
necessarily genuine. But a lot of our kids don't come to us with that skill. And I think even those of us who think of ourselves as being good at that also can have challenges in this,
Uh-huh.
right? And one of the best ways I think to shut down that ability is, if I have caused harm and I feel instantly vilified, stigmatized, excluded, my ability to then take on your perspective and try to repair that harm with you is probably just plummeted or is completely shut down.
Yeah.
So again, being able to work through all that without inadvertently creating that result in the student is just can really have some powerful results for everybody.
I have a question around that, and it's something that I've been thinking about as we've been having this conversation. We're all human beings, we're imperfect. I think that's what makes us beautiful. And so we've talked about all that we can do to prevent harm from occurring. But we know schools are going to have to respond to harm and also protect students and maintain a safe learning environment. So, what should educators and administrators keep in mind so that their responses do not unintentionally create more harm or exclusion. What advice would you offer to them?
So, what came up for me while you were asking the question was we got to walk our talk.
Mm.
We really have to walk our talk when it gets hard. And I think the cases that we all sort of have in the back of our mind, like the types of incidents that occur in school that we all have in the back of our mind while we're talking about this, are the ones where um, we have to stay the course and it gets really hard. I mean, I think a lot of the principles that we're discussing, the practices that we're discussing, it can be easy in the abstract when we are regulated, right? When I'm breathing and my feet are on the floor and I'm regulated, I can preach all of this and nod along to all of this. And we could have a room of folks nodding along to all of this. Okay, but then the thing just happened. So, how do we then stay grounded, maybe help our colleagues stay grounded, and talk about what it looks like to walk it out in the moment when the scary thing or the hard thing or the painful thing has happened? So, we have to really maintain that fidelity to the values that we've established for the community, right? Because we're also thinking about the important step of making sure that we have established that sense of community, spoken our values, started these practices early, practice them often, right? Practice them with consistency, all that stuff, that we've talked about needing to bake in. And then, okay, now in this moment, what does it look like to walk this out? And I think if we feel ourselves kind of going astray, or we see our colleague going astray, having that calling in moment for ourselves too. This is the thing that we said we were going to do. And so um, let's do it. And that starts with our initial responses within ourselves, to our colleagues, to that particular student. And being prepared, I think, as a team, because some criticism will flow from that. Not everybody will feel okay with that in that moment, whether that's a colleague or a parent, or another student. And so really maintaining that fidelity to what we've carved out, what we've said we're going to do. These are the moments where it's hardest to do what we've said we're going to do.
How do you communicate that with your larger school-wide community then? So if you've made a decision as educators, as an administrator, as a team, that in the hard times, in the big events, this is going to be our response, and it is incongruent with what others might be more inclined to do, which is to exclude or see some sort of larger disciplinary, more public facing something going on. So how do you communicate maybe ahead of time, like this is how we respond to things? I don't know. I just am thinking about some instances in schools locally where we don't know the ins and outs of what happens after the fact. And so for some, that can be a real challenge because they don't see the thing happening that they would have done. And so how do you speak to that as an administrator or a team?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head as you were, kind of working through the question there, which is we have to communicate it early and often. And I think we have to be so clear. This is the way that we address behavior. And of course, again, parent perspective, we sometimes are inundated with communication from schools and we may miss something. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we did not understand that was the plan.
Yeah.
So I think.
Oh, you really meant all the time. Okay.
Gotcha.
Right. You may have missed an email in the 20 that you got at the beginning of the school year. But so I think like whatever opportunities we have to communicate it, verbally, we know, we now have apps and we have emails and we have back to school night and all the things. But like talking about what our values are and how they look in practice, including in response to poor behavior or unsafe behavior, is so important so that we can point back to that. And I think it also just comes back to like that strength from a leadership team that believes in the work that they are doing and can remain unequivocal about the value of the work that they're doing in the moment when it's hard. If we waffle in that moment, we are communicating, we're not sure, and you shouldn't be sure either. So the way that we, again, going back to that fidelity of this is what we said we're going to do it, and how we communicate that strength and that assurance in our responses at the time. And then, like you said, walking that delicate balance of, and maybe even owning and validating and saying, I know it's hard that we can't tell you everything.
Mhm.
Here's what we can tell you. Because when we don't have any information, we fill in the gaps in a way that can increase the fear that we may be sitting with in the moment. So here are the things that we can tell you. Here are the things that we can't. And maybe even a here's why. I don't know that that always feels like the best moment to educate folks on why we may not be able to share all the information that they're looking for. And then turning right back to the what we can do, what we are doing, and how it's consistent with what we said we would do.
This has come up so much for me just in my experience supporting, local education agencies with development of emergency operations plans, right? So
Mm.
which portions of the plan can we share? What should we share? And there are so many, state and, federal legislation around sharing of information, right?
Right.
But I think, these are the things that you want to share. And as you said, Kristen, thinking about doing that way in advance, and you don't have to then feel the need to educate in the moment. If the parent or the school community has a sense of awareness around, in the event of, this incident of violence, this is what the school will do. This is how we will respond. But also, these are the prevention strategies that we're constantly implementing throughout the school year, as a part of our daily practices, but, also as a part of our overall EOP framework to support students, who are in need. And so, the parent in the school community has something that they can go back and reference.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring out, again, for school leaders, but also having those conversations with, individuals who are leading the development of, emergency operations plans at the school level or at the district level, getting a sense of maybe there is more that can be shared, with the parent community. And then also it prevents that feeling of, well, my child was, and unintentionally harmed or harmed directly, or there's that sense of inequity in terms of how the school or the district is managing response to something. If everyone has a sense of, these are the protocols, the courses of action, that we're all following in the event something happens, but also to prevent something from happening in the first place.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation today. I have to be honest that, Janelle, when you approached us about this particular episode, I was like, I don't know what it means.
Same. I'm with you, Megan.
I don't understand. And boy, is it
Right.
going to be a trick to figure out how to talk about it. But I really appreciate the frank way that you've been able to kind of guide at least me through what it means, what this whole ethical protection without criminalization means, and how we can support everyone within the school-wide community when big events, crises happen, and how we can work to prevent some of our unintentional responses to it ahead of time. So thanks so much, Kristin.
Yes. Thank you, Kristen.
Yes,
Thank you all.